This is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and my 100th show, but also the final one here on TNT, as TNT is going to be closing today. But basically, the Phoenix will rise. You cannot keep a good team down. I'm delighted to be joined by three titans of free speech: Baroness Claire Fox, William Mackesy, and Dr. Edward Skidelsky. Welcome to the Muckrakers.
It's great to be here.
It's great to see you all. And Claire, I've had the pleasure of sharing many a platform with, more platforms than Paddington. And also we got together, didn't we, very recently at a party where both of these people also were absolute joy. But for those who don't know, let me give a quick overview of Claire. She's the director of the Academy of Ideas, which she established to create a public space where ideas can be contested without constraint. And in September 2020, Claire became a member of the House of Lords as Baroness Fox of Buckley. And Dr. Edward Skidelsky is Director of Committee for Academic Freedom, and he's also a lecturer at Exeter University, specialising in aesthetics and moral philosophy. He's Director and founder of the Committee for Academic Freedom. And William Mackesy is the co-founder of Best Free Speech Practice and also the Alumni for Free Speech, where Andrew, who I know very well, is also based. He's co-founder and studied classics at law at Oxford University and was senior international corporate and regulatory order, whatever that was. So fantastic. Regulatory lawyer, weren't you? Where was that, Andrew? Sorry, where was that, William?
London, but actually mainly in Hong Kong. I spent a long time out there.
Very different over there. And different freedom of speech, basic rules and regulations. A bit tougher to speak out now, isn't it?
It's changed a lot in the last few years, not for the better, I'm afraid.
No, sadly. Look, what I'd like to do with each of you is give a bit more about your own background, why freedom of speech is so important. And most importantly, we're trying to address the balance of getting it right between freedom of speech and the balance of other people's rights. Let me start with you, Claire.
So, first of all, I think it's a universal right. So that means on occasion, one has to defend the right to speak freely of people whose views you'd rather not hear, who have got obnoxious views or vile views. It's obviously a foundation for me, a foundational value of any democracy, because how can you have the contest between ideas to decide how the country is going to go, or any country is going to go, if you can't hear as many of you as possible? And of course, it then affects in particular ways everything from the arts to universities, because there are particular reasons why you want artistic freedom, because it liberates creativity. People can imagine the unimaginable in the university sector in order to be able to prod and research and think through everything from history to science. One needs to be able to, again, ask questions, push and pull, and so on and so forth. So this kind of censorious climate we live in is bad for a democratic, rich public discussion atmosphere, but is also going to have a detrimental impact on some of the things we hold dear, as I say, from stymieing brilliant artworks to silencing students in seminars and academics doing invaluable research.
Let me bring you on, William. Tell me about a number of projects you're involved with freedom of speech. Tell me about both organisations and your view on getting the balance right between freedom of speech and other democratic rights.
Well, we have two organisations. One is a pressure group called Alumni for Free Speech, it's aimed at universities, and trying to persuade them and if necessary inflict pain for transgressions, failures. The second is called Best Free Speech Practice, which is trying to identify what the law actually requires in practice for the protection of free speech in the UK. Is a great deal more demanding than institutions seem to appreciate. So it's a priceless weapon, and actually we're making progress in persuasion. Why it's so important? In a way, I ask you two questions: which countries that don't have high free speech protection would you want to live in? And how do you get good outcomes and policies without vigorous debate? They're fundamental to a healthy society, and that's why it's a fundamental human right, reflects in international law, and strongly reflects in the UK. It's just terribly important.
Yeah, no, all excellent points on that sort of basis. Let me just bring some headline news in from you, Edward. Tell us about your particular passion on sort of freedom of speech and your organisation.
Thank you. So I'm a relative newcomer to this debate. I lived a quiet, retired academic life until about 2020-21, when I noticed a sudden change in the culture at my University of Exeter, which was echoed from my colleagues at other universities. Students started being disciplined for things they'd said in seminars. We started receiving emails from our department asking us to decolonize the curriculum to make it less white and Eurocentric. And all this was completely unprecedented and came as a big shock to me. It was the sort of thing I associated with places like the old Soviet Union. So I felt we really got to organize and take a stand to stop this, or it will just carry on and it will get worse and worse. So that's when I set up the Committee for Academic Freedom to try to organize academics to protest what was going on in the universities.
And it is extraordinary, isn't it? Because so many people, and I go to a number of these events, such as the glorious event we had just by Westminster earlier on this week. And there are a lot of people who are very scared to speak out, a lot of journalists in particular, because they're being arrested now, and trying to get that balance right as people are clamping down on free speech. And we had a big, well, I think the freedom of speech conference. There was a little seminar or talk was organised in a pub in Brighton, and they basically got shut down because they were questioning things about transgender identity and how that's being taught in the classroom. Well, I phoned up the pub and spoke to somebody there, and I explained about the story because the whole media is now focusing on them. And they publicly said, look, you can tell people that we don't want to comment, and they wouldn't give their name. And I said, well, I repeated the accusations to them and I said, look, are you happy for me to say that that is your official position? You're not going to comment, you don't want to give your name, in spite of the opportunity to basically balance the story. And they said, no, absolutely, we confirm that we're happy for you to do that. It is that balance, isn't it, between freedom of speech and other rights. And how do we get that balance right, Claire?
I don't know that there is a balance. I mean, I don't know that the other rights mean very much if you haven't got freedom of speech. So we had a ludicrous situation in the UK recently where, having gone through months and months and months of debate and argument in Parliament around a new bill which was going to enhance free speech rights, called the Higher Education Free Speech Bill, that then became an Act of Parliament. The new government came in, and a week before it was actually officially stamped and sealed, they cancelled the bill. And what they said was, oh, well, what we're doing is, apart from anything else, they said it's more important that universities concentrate on financially consolidating their interests and making sure that they can deal with the challenges they have, because many universities are under a lot of pressure from the point of view of money, rather than getting carried away with this kind of like almost like a side issue. I mean, they use other excuses, but I won't go into it. And the thing that really struck me was, so they want to keep universities open, but they don't think that academic freedom is important. Well, you can't have a university unless you give an enhanced duty of academic freedom. I mean, that just means you're keeping a building open with the words university above it. It's not quite the same. Right. I think that, again, democracy without free speech being central is an empty vessel. And we organise a big festival every year called the Battle of Ideas Festival. It's one of the things that I do. We've got one coming up in London on October the 19th and 20th. And it's a public gathering. You know, thousands of people come together to discuss the issues of the day. And they can be all sorts of issues about the economy, about international relations, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Ukraine, every possible thing. Can you imagine if you said to people, well, you're allowed to come to this festival, but you're not allowed to say certain things? How would you police it? You can't have a public discussion, a democratic debate. And I think one of the things that I'm most worried about, when you ask what motivates me, is I'm worried about the fact that we're putting a gag over ordinary people's capacity to explore. You know, they're rightfully able to think about the world they want to live in, to think out loud, is very important. And when you think out loud, you misspeak often because you're experimenting in thought. You want to live freely, but you want to say, what would happen if we did this? What about this? If you have to, you're so frightened to speak that it's like you're following a script written by somebody else. You actually are less human. And for many students, when they go to university, they kind of know what the script is. They kind of say all the right things, but they don't believe it. So they're speaking in bad faith. A lot of them feel, oh, if I say the wrong thing, I'll be called a bigot. I'll be ostracized. And so therefore they just mouth the words. Now, that is very like the kind of authoritarian, we associate it with East Europe, people snitching on each other for saying the wrong thing, the Stasi around the corner. And that sounds like hyperbole, but actually there is an atmosphere in which I don't think it feels like a free society for lots of people at the moment. Although I think it's important not to exaggerate that we live in an authoritarian country, we shouldn't be complacent about the fact that you could end up there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you do make that excellent point. I've made this many times on this program about the extraordinary situation where you have an act which received royal assent and all of a sudden the Starmageddon comes in and says, well, we're not going to carry on with that. Well, what's your take on that, William?
Well, so more generally, I think the cat's out of the bag in the sense that the online world and the world of social media has enabled ruthless and toxic people to enforce their viewpoints in a way that wasn't there before. It's going to have to be fought the whole way, and it's always going to be out there as a battleground now. And it's enabled people to use, as Claire's saying, totalitarian methods to enforce their viewpoints by taking out people who they don't like. With this, the recent revocation of the new act in Britain, it's been a disaster and done for the wrong reasons. And I think it's a constitutional vandalism, and it was done, I think, without being thought through properly by a rookie.
Yeah, I think what I tell you, I mean, you're absolutely right. What I also found incredibly impressive and well done to the gallery, because whilst William was speaking, we had a wonderful picture of Edward, and we wouldn't have given the game away if you hadn't taken a sip from your cup. The world's best ventriloquist, but I'm working them extra hard in the gallery. But you're absolutely right, and I think that's important. So let me bring you then in, Edward, on that sort of stuff, and I want to address this balance, if you like, because clearly things like defamation law, clearly things like inciting, as Laurence was saying earlier in the show, but working on that sort of basis, then we need to work out, where do we draw the line? What are your views, Edward?
Yes, I think free speech is a fundamental right. It's not an absolute. Obviously, there are limits, which are already enshrined in law. So we have laws against libel, defamation, incitement to violence, hate speech. Those are quite clearly established, but I think what's happened in recent years is that certain perfectly legitimate points of view have come to be seen as intrinsically offensive or harmful. So, for example, gender-critical feminists, when they go to give lectures at universities, students will say, these views are harming me, they're causing me psychological distress, and this is something that the university should protect us from. And that's been a very, very dangerous trend, and it's being used to shut down dissenting voices. So I think we've got to be very clear about the line between speech that is actually hateful and contrary to the law, and other forms of speech which, may be distasteful to some people, but isn't against the law.
Yeah, and I think that's right. Oh, yes, Claire, please come in.
Well, I just wanted to sort of slightly kick back, because I think that one of the dangers of saying, legal speech is we need to protect, but, speech that's against the law. I mean, I think we might want to look at some of those laws, because I do think there's been mission creep. I mean, first of all, I think the UK's libel laws are particularly draconian, and the onus is distinctly on, you have to prove you're innocent. And the people who have all the power in that are the prosecutors, the people who complain they've been libelled against. And there's big campaigns amongst free speechers on that. It's also the case that hate speech, that sounds like, well, why would you want hate speech? And I know that the law, would say that stirring up hate speech or so on is something which we should avoid. But hate is a very subjective category, and it's very difficult to pin that down legally. I actually do not want hate speech, but I would, call people out if they use hateful language or if they are saying something which I consider to be hateful. But I don't know that the law is the best place for it. And even incitement, we've seen in relation to the riots that incitement's become an ever broader category, because I think what Edward was right to make the point that, when J.S. Mill said the harm principle, it's free speech unless it causes harm. Now harm is an ever expanding category that includes people saying, I felt as though I was harmed by having somebody, speak about gender critical views, psychological harm. But it's true of hate. It's also true even of incitement. And I think that there's a very low bar being used, but legally even. And incitement, which is where you actually would say, Mrs. Smith lives at so-and-so, go round and shoot her, here's the gun, is one thing. But basically putting something on which then you then blame subsequent activities for implies that there's no responsibility on behalf of the people who do the actions. They saw the video online, they went and did it, as though they're kind of like attack dogs. You just go attack and they go off. It removes agency from people. I see horrible things online. I don't just go and do them because somebody's told me to. So I think we have to be careful that the law itself hasn't become a kind of weaponized, a vehicle through which this censoriousness is policed and punished.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Claire. And my biggest concern, as you say, is about that language and taking offence. And Yvette Cooper came out and said effectively they're going to prosecute people for offence and just basically causing offence and what's meant by harm. And I always sing out the praises of J.K. Rowling, as in bowling, when they sort of came in with the Scottish law. And she would say, well, come and the police at that stage when it first came out said, look, we will investigate every single complaint. Well, go and investigate the shoplifting and the people snatching phones and the sexual crime and various other things. And J.K. Rowling said, look, come to me first. Arrest me first. So we need people to keep speaking out. Finally, and it's been a joy having you all on the show, tell people how they can find you and a bit more about your organisation. Let's start with William.
Our alumni organisation, if you go to www.affs.uk, it's a member organisation. We really want alumni of UK universities to join us. So we can tell you what's going on and also enable you to help us in our campaigns, both generally and also when particular universities transgress. Universities really hate their alumni being angry with them, and it really helps push them in a sensible direction. Our second one, BFSP, Best Free Speech Practice, is at bfsp.uk, and that's more an information website for people who want good quality information about the UK requirements for UK mainly universities at the moment. So you can get in there a bit, but that's less interactive.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Edward.
So, yes, our organisation is called the Committee for Academic Freedom. If you just Google Committee for Academic Freedom, it will bring it up. If you're a UK-based academic, please sign our 3 principles. We have about 500 signatories to date. The more the better. If you're not, just follow us on X, and you'll get regular updates from us.
Excellent. And the final word to you, Claire.
So the Battle of Ideas Festival, which you should check out because it actually happens internationally, is battleofideas.org.uk. So do look at what's coming up. We have 100 panel debates, 400 speakers all over one weekend with thousands of attendees in London. But we also have satellite events, as I say, throughout Europe and beyond. And the easiest way of keeping in touch with us, I think, is through our Substack, which is Academy of Ideas, www.academyofideas.uk, or you can just Google Claire Fox Substack. I think it's a kind of, we try and be a one-stop shop, and I'd just like to commend William and Edward and all their organisations. These are on the ground organisations that really do the hard grind of creating a different kind of atmosphere. And what the Academy of Ideas does, it tries to work particularly with young people, but with everyone and anyone, to bring them together, some kind of a mothership where everyone can get together and live live freely by speaking freely at events that we organise. So come along.
I love it. Live freely by speaking freely. A great message to finish on. Claire, William, Edward, thank you so much for joining me on this particular platform. I will see you on another platform, more platforms than Badin, but for now, we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Okay,
we're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to be seeing some more titans of TNT before we say our final au revoir. Don't touch that dial.
The Muckrakers are restless. This is today's News Talk, TNT.